The quietest knock can become the loudest turning point in a person's life, especially when it arrives in the middle of a storm. Rain hammered the old tin roof with relentless force as thunder rolled across the mountains of northern Montana. Wind pushed against the weathered wooden cabin, making every window rattle as towering pine trees bent beneath the weight of the storm. Nathan Brooks tightened the last nail on the loose porch railing before climbing down the short ladder, wiping rainwater from his face with the sleeve of his faded flannel shirt. At 39 years old, life had taught him that some battles could be won with strength, but most were won with patience. Ever since losing his wife 5 years earlier, he had spent every day raising his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, inside the small cabin his father had built decades before. It was not a large home, and it certainly was not luxurious, but it was filled with warmth, quiet laughter, and the kind of peace that money could never purchase. Inside, the smell of homemade chicken soup drifted through the kitchen while Emma carefully colored pictures of the old wooden table. She looked toward the front door every time thunder echoed across the valley, then smiled when she saw her father returning from outside. Nathan stepped into the cabin, removing his soaked work boots before closing the door tightly behind him. He smiled at his daughter. "Looks like the storm wants to stay a while." Emma giggled. "Do you think it is scaring the deer?" Nathan poured himself a cup of hot coffee before answering. "Probably. Storms make everyone look for somewhere safe." He had barely lifted the cup when 3 slow knocks echoed through the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. Neither of them expected visitors. The nearest neighbor lived almost 6 miles away, and no one willingly drove these mountain roads during a storm like this. Nathan quietly placed his coffee back onto the table and walked toward the front door. Emma looked up with curious eyes, but remained seated exactly as he had taught her whenever strangers arrived. Nathan unlocked the door and slowly pulled it open. Standing beneath the dim porch light was a woman, wearing a dark raincoat completely soaked by the storm. Water streamed from the edges of her hood, while loose strands of chestnut hair clung to her face. Despite the heavy rain, her posture remained remarkably composed, although exhaustion was written across her pale features. Her blue eyes met Nathan's with an expression that carried both determination and quiet desperation. She did not introduce herself. She did not apologize for arriving so late. She simply took one slow breath before speaking in a calm voice that barely rose above the sound of the rain. "I know this sounds impossible, but I need your help tonight." Nathan studied her for several seconds without saying a word. He noticed the expensive leather gloves in her trembling hands, the polished shoes now covered with mud, and the unfamiliar luxury vehicle parked crookedly at the end of the gravel driveway, with one headlight flickering through the rain. Whoever she was, she clearly did not belong in these mountains. Yet there was no arrogance in her face, only urgency. Nathan stepped slightly farther beneath the porch roof, shielding her from part of the rain without realizing he had done it. "Ma'am," he said gently, "are you hurt?" She slowly shook her head. "No." Another flash of lightning illuminated the valley, briefly revealing the endless forest stretching behind her. She looked toward the darkness before turning back to Nathan. "But if I do not find what I came here for before sunrise, thousands of families could lose everything." Nathan frowned, unable to understand how a stranger standing on his porch could possibly carry the weight of so many lives. Behind him, Emma quietly appeared in the hallway holding a folded blanket. She looked at the woman with innocent concern before whispering, "Daddy, she looks cold." Nathan glanced back at his daughter, then returned his attention to the stranger, whose eyes now reflected equal measures of fear and hope. Without asking another question, he stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come inside," he said quietly. "You should not face a storm alone." The woman hesitated for only a heartbeat before crossing the threshold, unaware that neither of them yet realized this single act of kindness would forever change both of their lives. Nathan quietly closed the cabin door behind the stranger as another wave of thunder rolled across the mountains. The warmth inside immediately softened the chill clinging to her rain-soaked coat. Emma hurried toward the kitchen without being asked and returned a moment later carrying a clean towel and a steaming mug of hot chocolate. She held both out with the simple kindness only a child could offer. The woman accepted them with surprised gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. Emma smiled. "My daddy says hot chocolate helps people think better when they are cold." Nathan could not help smiling as well. Sometimes it even helps grown-ups remember to slow down. The woman wrapped both hands around the warm mug before taking a careful sip. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time since arriving. For several quiet moments, only the sound of rain striking the roof filled the room. Nathan never rushed strangers to explain themselves. He believed people often spoke more honestly after they realized they were safe. Finally, the woman lowered the cup onto the old wooden table. "My name is Victoria Hayes." Nathan nodded politely. The name meant nothing to him. He did not recognize her as the billionaire founder and chief executive officer whose face appeared regularly on financial magazines and television interviews. To him, she was simply a tired woman seeking help during a terrible storm. Victoria carefully removed a weathered leather envelope from inside her raincoat. The edges were worn with age, and a faded photograph slipped onto the table. It showed an old stone bridge hidden deep within a forest, surrounded by towering pine trees, much like those outside the cabin. Nathan studied the picture without speaking. "My grandfather gave me this photograph 12 years ago," Victoria explained quietly. "He told me that if I ever faced the day when everything I loved was in danger, I should come here and find a place in this picture." Nathan looked back at her. "And today is that day." Victoria slowly nodded. "Yes." She took a slow breath before continuing. "Inside that bridge is something he hid many years ago. If I do not recover it before sunrise, thousands of employees at my company could lose their jobs. Their retirement savings, their health insurance, everything they worked their entire lives to build could disappear." Nathan listened carefully. Her words carried no dramatic exaggeration, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had carried too much responsibility for too long. Emma looked between them with wide eyes. "Is it treasure?" Victoria smiled sadly. "Not the kind people usually imagine." Nathan rested one hand on the photograph. "If this is so important, why come here alone?" Victoria looked toward the rain-covered window before answering. "Because I no longer know who inside my company I can trust." She hesitated before adding, "My grandfather left one final instruction with this photograph. He said that when the time came, I should ask for help from the man living in this cabin. He never explained why." Nathan blinked in surprise. "Your grandfather knew me?" Victoria slowly shook her head. "He knew your name." Silence settled across the room once more. Nathan searched his memory, but could not remember ever meeting anyone from Victoria's family. He looked at the faded photograph again, then toward the dark forest beyond the window. Whatever waited beneath that bridge had been hidden long before tonight. He finally asked the only question that mattered to him. "If I leave with you, who stays here with Emma?" Before Victoria could answer, Emma gently placed her small hand on her father's arm. "Daddy," she said with quiet confidence, "Mrs. Wilson can stay with me if we call her. She always says I am welcome at her house during storms." Nathan smiled at his daughter. Mrs. Wilson lived only a few minutes away, and she had cared for Emma many times before. Victoria watched the exchange in silence. She had negotiated billion-dollar agreements in boardrooms around the world, yet she had never witnessed such simple trust between a father and his child. Nathan reached for the old landline telephone hanging beside the kitchen wall. As he dialed Mrs. Wilson's number, he glanced once more at the faded photograph resting on the table. Somewhere beyond the rain, beneath an old stone bridge hidden inside the mountains, the answers to questions neither of them fully understood had been waiting for years. And for reasons still unknown, those answers had chosen this stormy night to finally be found. Nathan watched through the rain-speckled window until the porch light illuminated Mrs. Wilson's old station wagon pulling into the driveway. Within minutes, Emma had hugged her father tightly, wrapped her favorite blanket around her shoulders, and promised to be brave until he returned. Nathan knelt beside her and gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. "I will be home before you know it," he said softly. Emma smiled with complete confidence. I know you will. You always keep your promises. Those simple words settled deeply inside Victoria. She had spent years surrounded by contracts worth billions of dollars, yet none of them seemed as meaningful as the trust shared between a father and his daughter. Nathan grabbed a heavy flashlight, a weatherproof jacket, and the old photograph before stepping outside. The rain had eased slightly, but the mountain air remained cold as they crossed the muddy driveway. Victoria glanced toward her luxury sport utility vehicle sitting crookedly beside the gravel road. One of the front tires had been shredded after striking a fallen tree branch several miles earlier. Nathan examined it briefly before shaking his head. This is not going anywhere tonight. He pointed toward his aging blue pickup truck parked beside the woodshed. The faded paint, rust along the wheel wells, and countless miles on the odometer revealed years of honest work rather than neglect. Victoria climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation. The engine rumbled to life with a familiar growl before Nathan slowly guided the truck onto the narrow mountain road. Rain continued tapping gently against the windshield while the old wipers struggled to keep pace. For several miles, neither of them spoke. The headlights carved narrow paths through the darkness as towering pine trees drifted past on both sides like silent witnesses. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. You never asked what my company is called. Nathan kept his eyes on the winding road ahead. Would the answer change where we are going? She looked at him for a moment before quietly replying, Probably not. Nathan smiled faintly. Then it can wait. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the photograph resting between them. During her entire career, almost every conversation had eventually turned toward money, influence, or opportunity. Yet Nathan had asked about none of those things. He had not recognized her name. He had not searched the internet. He had not even wondered whether helping her might change his own life. He had simply decided that someone needed help. The realization unsettled her in the most comforting way. After another stretch of quiet driving, Nathan finally asked, Your grandfather trusted this place enough to hide something here. Did he ever tell you why? Victoria slowly shook her head. Only that some truths should never be stored where powerful people expect to find them. She looked out toward the rain-covered forest. He believed forests remember what cities forget. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. He sounded like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. Victoria smiled for the first time since leaving the cabin. He did. He always said the loudest people usually heard the least. Nathan chuckled softly. I think I would have liked him. The road became steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains. Water streamed across the pavement while mist drifted low between the trees. Nathan instinctively slowed the truck before rounding a sharp curve. Suddenly his headlights caught something unusual. Fresh tire tracks cut deeply through the wet gravel before disappearing onto an abandoned logging trail, leading away from the main road. Nathan eased his foot onto the brake pedal. That is strange, he murmured. Victoria looked through the windshield. What is it? Nathan pointed toward the muddy tracks. These were made less than an hour ago. Victoria Froneth. Could they belong to hikers? Nathan gently shook his head. Not in weather like this. He studied the trail for another moment before continuing forward. Neither of them spoke again, but the silence. Inside the truck had changed. It was no longer filled only with uncertainty. Someone else had traveled into these mountains during the very same storm. Whether they were searching for the old stone bridge or something entirely different, Nathan could not yet know. But as the forest grew darker around them and the road narrowed beneath towering pines, one quiet thought settled heavily between both of them. They were no longer the only people following the path left behind by Victoria's grandfather. The abandoned logging trail narrowed until overgrown branches brushed against both sides of the pickup truck, their rain-soaked needles scraping softly across the windows like quiet whispers from the forest. Nathan drove slowly, allowing the tires to grip the muddy ground while the flashlight resting on the dashboard rolled gently with every bump. Victoria studied the faded photograph once again, comparing the outlines of distant hills with the landscape outside. After nearly 15 minutes, Nathan eased the truck to a stop. Ahead, The road disappeared beneath fallen branches and thick brush. "We walk from here," he said calmly. Victoria nodded without complaint. She pulled her raincoat tightly around her shoulders as Nathan retrieved the flashlight and the photograph. The cool mountain air smelled of wet pine, fresh earth, and the clean scent that always followed heavy rain. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, once before silence settled over the woods again. They followed a narrow footpath, barely visible beneath layers of damp leaves. Nathan moved carefully but confidently, recognizing the quiet language of the forest from years spent hunting, fishing, and hiking these mountains with his father. Every broken twig, every patch of disturbed mud, every bent fern told part of story. After several hundred yards, he suddenly stopped and lowered the flashlight toward the ground. Victoria stepped beside him. "What did you find?" Nathan pointed toward a series of clear boot prints pressed deeply into the soft earth. "Someone came through here very recently." Victoria knelt beside the tracks. Rain had softened their edges only slightly. "Can you tell how long ago?" Nathan studied them for several moments before answering. "Less than 2 hours. Maybe even less than one." Victoria slowly stood. "Then whoever made these could still be nearby." Nathan remained surprisingly calm. "Maybe. Or maybe they already found what they were looking for." Neither of them hurried. Instead, they continued following the winding trail until the trees gradually opened into a small clearing. There, exactly as shown in the old photograph, stood an aging stone bridge arching gracefully across a narrow creek whose rain-swollen water rushed beneath it with a steady roar. Moss covered much of the weathered stone, and vines wrapped themselves around the ancient railings as though nature had been patiently reclaiming the structure for decades. Victoria stared at the bridge in silence. "It is exactly the same," she whispered. Nathan unfolded the photograph beside the flashlight beam. Every crack in the stone matched perfectly. Every pine tree stood exactly where it had decades earlier. "Your grandfather chose a place that people stopped noticing," Nathan said quietly. They crossed the bridge slowly. Halfway across, Nathan paused and rested one hand against the cold stone railing. His fingers brushed over a section where the moss had recently been disturbed. He leaned closer, running his hand gently across the surface until he discovered several faint scratches that did not belong there. Victoria watched carefully. "What is it?" Nathan moved the flashlight lower. Hidden beneath the moss was a narrow seam barely visible against the surrounding stone. "There is something behind this wall." Together, they carefully cleared away damp moss and leaves until the outline of a concealed stone panel emerged. Victoria's breathing became noticeably slower as hope returned to her face. Nathan searched along the edges until his fingers located a small iron latch hidden beneath years of dirt. With steady pressure, he pulled. The heavy stone panel shifted outward with a deep grinding sound that echoed softly through the quiet forest. Behind it rested a weathered steel lockbox exactly large enough to fit inside the hidden compartment. Victoria stepped forward with trembling hands. "We found it." Nathan lifted the box carefully onto the bridge. It was heavier than either of them expected. The old combination lock still hung securely in place, untouched by rust thanks to the protection of the stone chamber. Victoria reached into her pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper containing 6 handwritten numbers left by her grandfather years before. She slowly turned the dial, one number at a time. A sharp metallic click broke the silence. She gently lifted the lid. Both of them leaned closer. Inside rested several neatly arranged envelopes, an old portable hard drive, and a leather journal tied with a faded blue ribbon. Nothing appeared to be missing. Yet Nathan's eyes did not remain on the contents. Instead, they drifted back toward the hidden compartment itself, where a thin layer of fresh mud marked the stone floor. He slowly shined the flashlight deeper inside and noticed something that made his expression quietly change. The dust along the back wall had been disturbed by a recent handprint. Someone had opened the compartment before them, carefully placed everything back exactly as it had been, and disappeared into the storm without taking a single thing. Victoria stared silently at the contents of the steel lockbox, while Nathan continued examining the hidden compartment with his flashlight. The fresh handprint remained unmistakable against the thin layer of dust covering the back wall. Whoever had opened the compartment had been careful, patient, and strangely respectful. Nothing had been damaged. Nothing had been stolen. Nathan finally stepped back and quietly closed the stone panel, leaving the hidden chamber exactly as they had found it. "Someone wanted us to believe nothing happened," he said. Victoria looked at him with concern. "Or they wanted us to find everything exactly as my grandfather intended." Nathan nodded slowly. "That is also possible." The steady sound of rushing water beneath the bridge filled the silence as Victoria carefully lifted the top envelope from the lockbox. Her grandfather's elegant handwriting covered the front in faded black ink. It simply read, "For Victoria." She carefully broke the old wax seal and unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained steady and clear. She began reading aloud. "If you are holding this letter, then the day I feared has finally arrived. You will be surrounded by intelligent people, successful people, and ambitious people. But on this day, none of those qualities will matter as much as character." Victoria paused for a moment before continuing. "You may wonder why I asked you to seek help from a man you have never met. The answer is simple. Honest people are difficult to find, but once you find one, never measure his worth by his bank account. Measure it by the promises he keeps when nobody is watching." Victoria lowered the letter and looked toward Nathan. He remained quietly standing beside the bridge railing, giving her the privacy to absorb her grandfather's words. She continued reading with a softer voice. "Years before writing this letter, I began learning about a young man named Nathan Brooks. He did not know I existed, and I preferred it that way. I watched from a distance because I wanted to know whether genuine kindness could survive hardship. I learned that he returned lost wallets without expecting rewards. I learned that he volunteered after floods without speaking to reporters. I learned that after losing his wife, he chose to become the father his daughter deserved instead of allowing grief to harden his heart. I also learned something even more valuable. His dignity remained untouched by poverty." Victoria stopped reading altogether. Her eyes slowly lifted toward Nathan with disbelief. "My grandfather knew about you." Nathan looked genuinely surprised. "I never knew about him." Victoria unfolded the remaining page. "There is more." She took another slow breath. "If Nathan Brooks is standing beside you today, then trust his judgment even when it differs from your own. Wealth can purchase expertise, but it cannot purchase wisdom. There will come a moment when the easiest decision will also be the wrong one. When that moment arrives, follow the man who still believes people matter more than profit." The forest fell completely silent except for the flowing creek beneath the bridge. Victoria carefully folded the letter and held it close against her chest. For years, she had believed her grandfather admired brilliant executives and fearless entrepreneurs above everyone else. Now she realized the person he trusted most had been an ordinary single father living quietly in a mountain cabin. Nathan walked toward the lockbox and gently picked up the old leather journal. Before opening it, he paused. "Your grandfather spent years preparing for tonight. Victoria Nadif. He believed this day would come." Nathan glanced once more toward the dark forest surrounding the bridge. Then he probably expected someone else would come looking as well. Victoria looked around the clearing where shadows stretched between the towering pine trees. Everything appeared peaceful, yet she could no longer ignore the strange feeling that the unknown visitor who had opened the compartment before them had not come to steal the truth. Somehow, they had come to witness whether the right people would finally find it. The leather journal felt surprisingly heavy in Nathan's hands, not because of its weight, but because of everything it seemed to represent. He carefully untied the faded blue ribbon and opened the weathered cover. The first several pages contained handwritten notes, dates, and observations recorded over many years in Victoria's grandfather's precise handwriting. Victoria stood beside him as the flashlight cast a warm circle of light across the aging paper. Nathan turned another page and stopped. A heading near the top immediately caught both of their attention. It read, "The day the company forgets its purpose." Victoria quietly covered her mouth. Her grandfather had written these words nearly 15 years earlier. She began reading aloud. Every successful business eventually faces the same temptation. It begins believing numbers matter more than names. When that day arrives, people will call difficult decisions necessary. They will speak of efficiency while forgetting compassion. They will protect quarterly reports while sacrificing families. If my company ever reaches that point, it must be reminded why it was built. Nathan listened silently while rain continued dripping from the pine branches above the bridge. Victoria turned another page. Neatly attached beneath a protective sheet rested several original company documents bearing signatures from the earliest days of the business. There were employee ownership agreements, charitable trust records, and legal amendments that had never appeared in the company's modern archives. Nathan noticed another sealed envelope tucked inside the journal. Across the front were the words, "Open only when the board refuses to listen." Victoria carefully opened it. Inside was a typed letter together with a small flash drive secured inside a protective case. She unfolded the letter and read the first paragraph. The enclosed files contain recorded board meetings, financial records, and signed agreements proving that the company was never intended to maximize wealth for a few individuals. Its original charter required every major decision to protect employees before executive compensation. Anyone attempting to erase these commitments has abandoned both the law and the values upon which this company was founded. Victoria stared at the pages without speaking. Her voice finally returned as little more than a whisper. "This changes everything." Nathan looked toward her calmly. "Does it protect the people you mentioned?" She nodded slowly. "If these documents are authentic, they protect thousands of employees. Retirement plans, medical benefits, family assistance programs. Everything my grandfather created before he retired." Nathan gently placed the journal back inside the lockbox. "Then we should get these somewhere safe." Victoria hesitated. "There's one problem." She looked toward the flash drive. "If people inside the company have already been searching for this evidence, they will know exactly what these documents mean." Nathan thought quietly for several seconds before answering. Truth usually makes honest people feel peaceful and dishonest people feel nervous. Victoria smiled fondly. "You always make complicated things sound simple." Nathan shrugged gently. "Sometimes they are." They secured the journal, the envelopes, and the flash drive. Inside a waterproof backpack Nathan had brought from the truck. Before leaving the bridge, Victoria turned back one last time. "My grandfather trusted that one day someone would choose people over power." Nathan looked across the quiet creek flowing beneath the old stone arch. Maybe he believed kindness lasts longer than fear. As they began walking back through the forest, the rain gradually faded into a light mist. Dawn was still hours away, yet the darkness no longer felt quite as heavy. Halfway down the narrow trail, Victoria's cellular phone suddenly vibrated inside her coat pocket. She looked at the illuminated screen. The message came from an unknown number. There was no greeting and no signature. Only one sentence appeared beneath the gray light of the forest. "You found the evidence. Now bring it home." Victoria stopped walking. Nathan quietly waited beside her. A second message appeared almost immediately. "Do not trust the loudest voices when the sun comes up. Trust the man walking beside you." Victoria slowly lowered the phone and looked toward Nathan with quiet disbelief. He had not asked to be part of any corporate battle. He had only opened his front door to a stranger during a storm. Yet somehow, with every step deeper into this unexpected journey, it became clearer that someone had been quietly preparing for the two of them to meet long before either of them knew the other existed. The drive back through the mountains felt quieter than the journey into them. Rain had almost disappeared, leaving only a light mist that floated between the towering pines while the first faint traces of dawn waited somewhere beyond the clouds. Nathan guided the old pickup carefully along the narrow road, both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The waterproof backpack containing the journal, letters, and flash drive sat securely between the seats. Victoria looked out the passenger window, but her thoughts remained fixed on the anonymous messages and her grandfather's words. For the first time in many years, she questioned whether she had truly understood the company she had spent her life leading. "Can I ask you something?" she finally said. Nathan nodded, without taking his eyes off the road. "Of course." Victoria hesitated before speaking. "If you knew those documents could make powerful people angry, would you still help me?" Nathan smiled gently. People usually become angry when the truth interrupts their plans. That does not make the truth wrong. Victoria looked down at her hands. "You make it sound easy." Nathan quietly shook his head. "Doing the right thing is rarely easy. It is simply worth doing." His words settled over the silence like the morning fog drifting across the mountains. Victoria had spent years listening to consultants, attorneys, investors, and financial analysts. None of their carefully prepared presentations had ever carried the quiet certainty contained in one sentence from a man driving a 20-year-old pickup truck. They reached the main highway just as the eastern sky began turning pale gray. Victoria's cellular phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of her chief legal officer. She answered immediately. "Victoria, where are you?" his anxious voice asked. "The board moved the emergency meeting forward by 2 hours. Everyone is already gathering." Victoria exchanged a quick glance with Nathan before replying. "I will be there." The attorney lowered his voice. "Several directors are demanding that you approve a restructuring package before the markets open. They say there is no other choice." Victoria tightened her grip on the phone. "Tell them no decisions will be made until I arrive." Before he could answer, the call ended. Almost immediately, another message appeared from the same unknown number that had contacted her in the forest. It contained only one sentence. "They will ask you to hurry because they are afraid you will have time to think." Victoria quietly showed the message to Nathan. He read it once before returning his attention to the road. "Your grandfather understood people well." Victoria slowly nodded. "Someone else understands them too." Nathan remained silent for several miles before speaking again. Sometimes the person who leaves no name behind is trying to protect everyone else instead of taking credit. Victoria considered those words carefully. She had spent much of her career rewarding the loudest voices in every room. Yet every meaningful step during the past several hours had been guided by people who expected nothing in return. As the skyline of the city gradually appeared in the distance, sunlight finally broke through the thinning clouds, casting long golden rays across the highway. Victoria suddenly noticed something resting inside the leather journal that neither of them had seen before. A small folded photograph had slipped from between 2 pages as the truck rounded a gentle curve. She carefully picked it up. It showed a younger version of her father standing beside another man wearing muddy work clothes near a flooded riverbank almost 10 years earlier. The image had faded with age, but one face remained instantly recognizable. Victoria stared at it in complete disbelief before slowly turning the photograph toward Nathan. He glanced at it briefly, then looked back at the highway. "I remember that flood," he said quietly. "Several families were trapped after the bridge washed out." Victoria looked at him with wide eyes. "The man standing beside my father is you." Nathan studied the picture for another moment before giving a small, thoughtful smile. "Your father insisted on helping everyone else before leaving himself." Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. "He told our family that a stranger saved his life that day, but he never learned the man's name." Nathan's expression remained calm, almost puzzled. "I was only doing what anyone should have done." Victoria slowly lowered the photograph. In that single quiet moment, she understood something her grandfather had recognized years before. The greatest acts of character often belong to people who never believed they had done anything extraordinary at all. The glass headquarters of Hayes Industries reflected the first light of morning as Nathan parked his aging pickup beside a row of polished executive vehicles. Employees in tailored suits hurried toward the entrance carrying briefcases and coffee cups, but more than a few paused to glance curiously at the weathered truck standing among luxury sedans. Nathan stepped out, adjusted the strap of the waterproof backpack across his shoulder and calmly waited for Victoria. She looked at the towering building that had defined most of her adult life. Yet for the first time, it did not feel like a place of certainty. It felt like a place where an important promise had been forgotten. Together, they walked through the front doors. Several employees immediately recognized Victoria and greeted her with respectful smiles. But their expressions changed when they noticed a quiet man beside her wearing muddy work boots and a faded flannel shirt. Nathan paid no attention to the curious looks. He admired the large photographs displayed throughout the lobby instead. Most featured factory workers, engineers, and families rather than executives. He smiled softly. Your grandfather wanted people to remember who built this company. Victoria looked at the photographs with fresh eyes. I stopped noticing them years ago. They entered the executive conference room, where nearly 24 board members and senior officers were already waiting around a long, polished table. Conversations immediately faded as Victoria walked in. Some directors appeared relieved. Others looked uneasy. Nathan quietly remained near the back of the room without speaking. One board member stood and forced a professional smile. Victoria, we have prepared the restructuring documents. If we approve them now, the markets will respond before opening. Victoria calmly placed the leather journal, the sealed envelopes, and the flash drive on the conference table instead. Nothing will be approved until everyone sees what my grandfather left behind. Several surprised glances spread across the room. The company's legal officer connected the flash drive to the presentation screen, while Victoria carefully handed copies of the original documents to each director. Silence gradually replaced the earlier confidence as page after page revealed the company's founding agreements. Employee protection clauses, long-forgotten trust provisions, signed commitments placing families ahead of executive bonuses. One director quietly removed his reading glasses and read the same paragraph twice before looking toward Victoria in disbelief. Another slowly leaned back in his chair without saying a word. Nathan observed the room with calm patience. No voices were raised. No accusations filled the air. The truth itself carried enough weight. Victoria then opened the leather journal and read aloud the final message her grandfather had written for future leaders. A company does not become great because it earns more. It becomes great because people trust it enough to build their lives around it. Protect that trust before you protect your reputation, because reputation can always recover, but broken trust rarely does. When she finished reading, the room remained completely silent. No one reached for the restructuring documents waiting beside them. No one argued with the evidence now resting before every seat. After several long moments, the oldest independent director slowly stood. His voice was calm and respectful. We have spent years discussing profits while forgetting purpose. Today, your grandfather reminded us of both. He gently closed the folder containing the restructuring proposal. One by one, every other director quietly pushed the same proposal aside. Nathan watched without satisfaction or pride. He simply looked out through the tall windows where sunlight now filled the city skyline. Victoria turned toward him with grateful eyes. She finally understood why her grandfather had trusted a man who had never attended a corporate meeting in his life. Nathan had not changed the room with clever arguments or impressive credentials. He had changed it simply by standing beside the truth without fear. As the meeting officially adjourned, the company's secretary approached Victoria carrying a small envelope that had been discovered earlier that morning inside her grandfather's old office safe. Across the front, written in the same familiar handwriting, were only 6 quiet words. Give this to Nathan when they listen. 1 year later, the same mountain valley welcomed another gentle rain, but this time the clouds carried peace instead of uncertainty. The small cabin looked almost unchanged, with fresh paint covering the porch railing Nathan had repaired on that unforgettable night and colorful. Flower boxes blooming beneath every window. Emma, now 9 years old, laughed as she chased butterflies across the yard before stopping to wave at a familiar vehicle slowly making its way up the gravel driveway. Nathan stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching quietly as Victoria climbed out carrying a simple white bakery box instead of a leather briefcase. She wore blue jeans, a light sweater, and hiking boots still dusted with gravel from the winding mountain road. There were no security vehicles following behind her, no assistants carrying folders, and no reporters waiting to record her arrival. She walked toward the porch with the same calm smile she had worn only once before, just after Emma had handed her a cup of hot chocolate during the storm. Emma ran across the yard and hugged Victoria without hesitation. "You came back," she said happily. Victoria smiled and gently hugged her. "I promised I would." Nathan opened the screen door and welcomed them inside. The cabin smelled of fresh cinnamon rolls cooling on the kitchen counter, while soft music drifted quietly from an old radio. Victoria placed the bakery box on the table and laughed softly. "I finally remembered to bring dessert instead of problems." Nathan smiled. "That is a nice change." They shared breakfast together while rain tapped gently against the windows. Conversation flowed easily now, no longer interrupted by uncertainty or hidden truths. Hayes Industries had spent the past year restoring every employee program described in the founding documents. Retirement plans had been protected. Family assistance funds had been expanded. Scholarships honoring the company's original values had been created across several states. One of them quietly carried the name Brooks Family Scholarship, although Nathan had protested when Victoria first suggested it. She had simply smiled and replied that some acts of kindness deserved to become opportunities for others. After breakfast, Victoria reached in her bag and carefully removed the small envelope that had waited inside her desk for an entire year. "I never showed you what your letter said," she admitted. Nathan looked surprised. "I forgot all about it." Victoria handed him the folded paper. He opened it carefully and recognized the familiar handwriting immediately. The letter was short. "Nathan, if this letter reaches your hands, then my granddaughter finally learned what leadership truly means. Thank you for proving something I spent my entire life believing. Character cannot be inherited, purchased, or promoted. It is quietly chosen every single day. You may never realize how many lives your ordinary decisions have protected, but that has never mattered to you. That is exactly why they matter to me. Please continue living exactly as you always have. The world needs more examples than heroes." Nathan folded the letter slowly and looked out the kitchen window toward the quiet forest where the storm had once begun. He did not speak for several moments. Finally, he smiled with the same gentle humility Victoria had come to admire. "Your grandfather gave me far more credit than I deserve." Victoria softly shook her head. "No, he simply noticed what everyone else overlooked." Emma looked between them with innocent curiosity. "Does that mean Grandpa's friend was right?" Nathan smiled. "Which friend?" Emma pointed toward the letter. "The one who said people matter more than money." Victoria felt warmth fill her heart as Nathan answered without hesitation. "Yes, sweetheart. He was right." The three of them stepped onto the porch as the rain gradually stopped and sunlight broke gently through the retreating clouds, filling the valley with golden light. Birds began singing from the surrounding pines while the mountains stood quietly beyond the clearing, unchanged by time, yet forever connected to the lives they had brought together. Victoria looked toward Nathan with grateful eyes before asking one simple question. "May I keep coming back?" Nathan glanced at Emma, who was already smiling because she knew the answer before either adult spoke. He looked back at Victoria and quietly said, "You have never needed permission to belong here." And in the peaceful silence that followed, there was nothing left to prove, because dignity had found respect, kindness had found its reward, and 3 lives had quietly become one family through choices that had never sought recognition, only the courage to do what was right.